Hey everybody, thanks for coming. Thanks for coming. I know usually we're competing with amazing weather and a little less so today, but luckily we've got this place in case any rain happens and it's still warm out, so really, really glad you're all here. Very much excited for this. I'm super excited for Ron's talk. It's so weird. He just came to one of our events one day and just a fascinating guy and agreed to talk. Chris will do the formal introduction, but really stoked to have Ron share with us today. Just a couple of housekeeping things. You heard me say this before. We will record and we'll post this on the YouTube channel, so if you care about that and your voice being heard, whatever, I don't know. The camera's not going to be on anyone, so you don't have to really worry about it. But you know, if you want to say your name, if you ask any questions, whatever, just be careful about that. If it's a concern for you. I will, so basically, actually the one thing, Ron, if you want, I don't know if you want to have questions during or after. I don't know.
Let's go after.
Okay, cool. So if you have any questions, keep in mind. And then, yeah, like kind of the normal blocking and tackling stuff you hear me say all the time. Donations, would appreciate any donations. Obviously, we love it if you bring food. That's really helpful as well. But if you know, we do have to pay for this site. It costs about $100 every time for this place. So if you can kick in a few bucks, that'd be really helpful. No expectation. We always want these things to be free. That's the most important thing. Accessibility is the most important thing. But you know, if you can help out, that's great. Same with food. If you brought food, awesome. Thanks so much. And it's really nice to share. We have so much more every day. It's like we have so much. But if you can't, please don't feel don't feel nervous about it. Like, it's all about being here and just kind of sharing and getting together, right? That's what it's all about. So another thing we always go on about is our group chat. It's called Discord. Basically, it's a way to kind of keep in touch with each other. We'll have sometimes go on hikes and just have offshoot conversations and little gatherings or whatever. It's just a way to kind of keep in touch with everybody. We can learn some more stuff. Like people will share articles, we'll discuss, ask questions. So it's a great thing. Just reach out to me. I'll get your number, send you a link to that. It'd be nice. And if you want, you can send me a message on Meetup as well about getting on there. And also in the Discord, we have an anonymous feedback form. So if you have anything to say, any feedback, any suggestions, positive, negative, we'd love to hear it on there. So if you're not on there, get on there. And if you are, it's in the welcome channel. There's a link to it on there. The next event we're going to do in August, I think it's looking like August 21st. We are not going to have any speaker or anything. Summer's busy, people are slow. We're just going to have a party. We're going to get together at Jericho Beach Park. It'll be real close to the beach if you want to jump in for a swim, but we'll stay in like a shady spot somewhere near the trees there. Just going to do that, I think, again around the same time, Sunday afternoon or Sunday night, probably the 21st. So that'll be the next one. We'll get the event out soon. And I think that's usually all I said. That's all of it. Doing small groups today? Yes. As usual, we have format for today. Ron's going to speak for however long, QA, then we'll do small groups, and then try to break out after about 20 minutes. Small groups kind of just naturally break out as whatever you feel. You can talk for hours if you want. No one's going to stop you. But yeah, we'll get the food and hang and whatever. So that's that. I'm going to let Chris introduce Ron. And first of all, thanks, Chris, so much for organizing this. And we all have like a kind of a leadership group of folks that have been kind of stepping up to help out. Chris has been doing the last few. We have some other folks who will soon. If you're interested in anything like that, let me know. We're always looking for help. This is a total volunteer effort. No one is making money on this. If anything, it's in the red.
Well, thanks, Kenny. I don't have too much to add. I'm ready to just get things started here. I'm excited for it. We have Ron Phares today from the North Vancouver Unitarian Church, who's going to talk a little bit about religion and psychedelics, which is a mix you don't hear too much about, and hear about what the future holds for both of those things. So I'm going to get Mariana to do our land acknowledgement first, and then have Ron up. And then when that's done, we're going to, like Kenny said, break into small groups, chat a little bit, and then that's just going to veer into our potluck. So please stick around for that.
I got the good land acknowledgement. Okay. The City of Vancouver acknowledges that it is situated on the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. This place is the unceded and ancestral territory, whoops, I've already said that, and has been stewarded by them since time immemorial. Vancouver is located on territory that was never ceded or given up to the Crown by the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. The term unceded acknowledges the dispossession of the land and the inherent rights that the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh hold to the territory. The term serves as a reminder that Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh have never left their territories and will always retain their jurisdiction and relationships with the territory.
Without further ado, Ron.
So I'm going to sit on the table, if that's okay. And in the back, if you can't hear me, raise your hand, and I'll try to speak a little
So
louder.
if you're gonna sit there, there are spots down here closer.
Yeah,
if
if
you
you
can't
want
hear,
to,
so-
right, right.
Get this out of the way.
Because that's my Sunday gig. Chris, I'm so glad that you, where'd you go?
Right here.
So glad that you said that the bit about religion and psychedelics not being mentioned very often together, because that irritates the hell out of me. As a matter of fact, I was at the Vancouver Psychedelic Festival's thing right before COVID hit that year, and the place was at UBC, and it was like filled with therapists and some psychedelic professionals, and then psychedelic laity, so to speak. And I'm sitting there going, where are all the clergy? Like this is a spiritual technology at its root, as far as I'm concerned. And why are we not at this table? Well, I mean, we all kind of know the reasons why we're not at that table, but we ought to be at that table, in my opinion. So what I'd like to do is briefly give you like the frame of where I'm coming from as a Unitarian Universalist. So, not to evangelize, but just to let you know my frame, where I'm coming from. Then to let you know a little bit about an opportunity that I had recently to go to the Netherlands on a retreat specifically for religious leaders. Let you know a little bit about how that retreat was conducted, and then let you know my vision for psychedelics in traditional, institutional, religious setting in the West, particularly. So, and of course, one thing that I have learned maybe the hard way recently is particularly if we're being recorded, that it's a good thing to say that when you are engaging with psychedelics, make sure your source is good, your set and setting are right, and that you've done the appropriate preparation to take that journey, right? And that your health is in good keeping, right? So, just real quick, Unitarian Universalism. I'm a Unitarian Universalist minister or pastor. I'm from the States, and so I guess the word minister has a slightly different connotation up here. It might mean that I'm working for the government. Obviously I'm not. I'm a pastor. The church is on the North Shore. There's another UU congregation on 68th and Oak. And I don't speak for my entire tradition here. I don't even speak for my congregation. I speak right now specifically for myself. Now, there is some support in my congregation and in my tradition for bringing psychedelics into that institution, but it's very nascent right now. It's embryonic. We're on the ground floor of that conversation. So Unitarian Universalism started off kind of as an offshoot of the Abrahamic traditions of Judaism and Christianity, moved through hundreds of years later into a very humanist orientation, almost like a dogmatic humanism, and now we're kind of emerging from that into more of a mystical framework and exploring what it would mean to shift the worldview that we are currently, our paradigm right now, right? So, so we're like interested in like post-Enlightenment, post-reductionistic thinking, and particularly interested in dismantling racism and other oppressions as a spiritual practice. We are generally organized by a set of principles. We have 8 principles. Our first one is the inherent holiness of every person. Our 7th one is the interdependence of everything, and that kind of summarizes where we locate ourselves spiritually. And we have a bunch of sources. You could, if you're interested, look it up later. But one of them is direct experience. So direct experience, which I think speaks to psychedelics, right, or meditation, or spiritual practice. And also, we source from earth-centered traditions the world over, as long as we are careful about appropriation, right? So that's Unitarian Universalism in a nutshell, or as much as you can be. We're non-dogmatic, by the way, which means we don't have a dogma, we don't have doctrines. We just have these principles and sources and kind of make our way from there. So, a couple years ago, Michael Pollan's book came out, and I guess the Netflix thing just dropped a couple days ago. I watched the first episode so far. By the way, last night, my voice is a little bit raw right now. Last night I was at a kirtan thing. Have you guys ever done a kirtan thing? Yeah. That was awesome. It's psychedelic in its own way, right? So apologies for the voice. Anyway, so that book came out, and it when I was younger, I'd done psychedelics recreationally. There's always the sort of spiritual sidecar that you hope comes along. And, or at least for me, that was always the case. And it was mostly at shows and whatnot. And then kind of that phased out of my life. But Pollan's book came out, and I read it with interest because I'm a religion nerd, right? I'm a minister. You don't get to be me without being a geek about spirit, whatever that looks like to you. And so I was interested in, I've always been interested in meditation, how to have an experience. And psychedelics are an obvious means to that end, and I resisted them as a shortcut for a long time. But Pollan's book came out, I read it with interest, and that sort of reignited my enthusiasm for psychedelics. Then I moved up here. I was living in Arizona before this. Moved up here a few years ago, attended that conference, became frustrated that none of my colleagues were there except for one person that I recognized as a religious professional. And then, just sort of continued to have that conversation and cultivate relationships within my profession. And one of those led to an introduction with a man named, a priest, an Episcopal priest named Hunt Priest, as it so happens. And so he lives in Georgia, I believe, right now. And he participated in a study out of Johns Hopkins. And of course, if you know the history of psychedelic research, Johns Hopkins has sort of kept the flame burning, at least in the US. And they did a lot of research into the therapeutic application of psychedelics. And then they started to look at the religious, thankfully, they started to look at the religious applications, the spiritual applications of psychedelics.
That inchworm is coming to you.
Right there?
That thing there.
Okay, that's okay. So he participated, they had this study. Are you a religious professional? Have you done psychedelics? If not, please come, sign up, and we'll do an experiment on you. And I tried to sign up, but several Grateful Dead shows ruled me out. So yeah, it was sad. But Hunt got to go. I didn't know him at this time. He got to go. He did the program, and for him, it was a life-changing event. And so somehow he emerged from that, not only with his life changed, but with funding. Yes. Yes. And with that funding, and I don't know, Hunt, if you're watching this, I don't know how that happened, but he formed an organization called Ligeri, which is, you can hear the root word of religion in there. It's Latin. Ligare means to connect. So psychedelics are obviously a means of connection. Right? And so this is a group, specifically a Christian, of folks who are interested in the religious application of psychedelics. With the funding, he put together a retreat/conference in the Netherlands. The Netherlands, because there it is completely and entirely legal, not even gray market. Then put out, I don't know how I got word, actually. I can't remember that part of the story, but I got word that he was putting a retreat together for religious professionals. And as a Unitarian Universalist, because we're from the Abrahamic sort of heritage, I sometimes can sneak in under the Christian umbrella a little bit. I'm not a Christian, but so they let me in. And as a UU, we're always like religious diversity in the room, right? Like if Christians need to have religious diversity, they call it UUs because they know we check that box somehow. So anyway, I got to go, and there was maybe 15 religious professionals. Some were, like myself, parish ministers. Some were chaplains in the hospital or other settings. Some were school superintendents, and some were university chaplains. And it was amazing. We had two things powerfully in common. One, we were all religion nerds, right? And two, we were all psychedelic nerds. And so as soon as we got together, it's like we had inside jokes, pre-existent. And the bond was fast and lovely. Is that, he's still coming at me? It's just an intro. It's a future moth, I think, right? Okay? Okay. And so the program was, we got together, and that bond was kind of accidental and really, really fortunate. But we did other exercises throughout the first part of the week to cultivate relationship, and it was sort of like psychedelic calisthenics in a way. So like the first day we got there, and there was about one guide for every 2 participants. So there was a lot of guides, and they were from various places, but specifically, it's escaping me right now, but it's I know you all would recognize the name, but it's slipping my mind. Anyway, so they had us do everything from, like, we got together the first day and they played music with blindfolds on, and we danced around, and then we did a breath work, like a holotropic breath work the next day, which of course is its own psychedelic experience. And then we did some Osho. I don't know if any of you have done Osho meditation, but it's very embodied, physical, vocal meditation. All these things to kind of like loosen up our minds and increase trust with one another. And crucially, the day was set up such that after each of these, before and after each of these experiences, we would sit in circle and check in or reflect on what we were going through, or what had just happened, or what had happened yesterday. And that was really, also, crucially, we had set an intention at the beginning of the week, which I found to be probably the most powerful, including the Truffle Journey. That was the most powerful thing of the entire week, to set an intention in a group, wound up creating a sort of lens through which everything of that week passed and became relevant to the lens. So it's almost like you develop, in a way, a vocabulary with the world that is then speaking to you. And if I say to you, as psychonauts, that you receive messages when you're on a journey, you know what I'm saying, right? So when you set an intention in a group, it basically starts to change your mind in that moment, and the messages start to come in the same way. So the messages start to come throughout the week. My personal intention was, how do we feel at home in a culture that is so transient? Because I feel like if I, as a minister, can help you feel deeply at home where you are, that will increase your love and comfort for where you are and for yourself. And also, you don't trash your home. And we're kind of trashing our home, right? And I think it's because we don't feel at home. So this is my big theological question. And it was my question for my specific journey and for the whole week. And the messages started coming, addressing that question from the drop. So Tuesday, so I guess we got there maybe on a Sunday. I should also say that the beautiful thing about this group of people, these Christian leaders, and I am not a Christian leader, was that they did not mistake the map for the terrain as religious leaders. So their Christianity, they felt, I think, at least I felt that they felt, that it was the map to get them to the terrain of a spiritual encounter and a spiritual life, right? So they just were using that Christian vocabulary and story as the map to get them to the terrain. It wasn't my map. We didn't care what map you were using because we all knew the terrain we were trying to walk. So the day that Truffles came, I was really disappointed because they kept saying Truffles, and everyone was had a Dutch accent also, and so I was just those two things in my mind locked, and I thought we were gonna have chocolate. I thought it was gonna be the chocolate mushroom things that you can get, right? And I was like, that's good because I hate mushrooms. I really hate mushrooms. Except on pizza. That's the only place I like mushrooms. And nope, it wasn't chocolate. It was a cup of truffles, which I did not know are like a different thing than a mushroom, kind of. And so I, choked them back. And halfway through, I remembered, oh no, I just hate mushrooms. So this is fine, right? Like it wasn't, I was feeling like I was eating gross psychedelic mushrooms. And I'm like, oh no, all mushrooms are gross. And that made it better for me. And then it was a little bit strange. This is a part that I didn't particularly enjoy. But because I think this group had kind of grown out of the John Hopkins thing, which is, therapy. And you sit in a room on a couch, I guess, and you have your guides or your minders, and you put a blindfold on, and then you listen to music, and you have your experience. My history with psychedelics was at Grateful Dead shows, etc., where you're with 30,000 other people who are doing what you're doing, right? And you're dancing, and you're moving, and you're interacting, and yes, you are influencing each other's experience, and hopefully that's going well for the other 30,000 of you. And normally it did, at least for me. So this was very different. We sat in a circle. They sort of blessed us as we came in, which felt a little, to me, it felt a little strangely appropriative, but because it wasn't a Christian blessing, it was something else. And but then I remembered these people are just basically telling me that they want me to feel cared for. And again, let's not mistake the map for the terrain. So they gave me that blessing. They gave everybody the blessing. We came in. We sat in circle again. There was a nice, sort of futon-y thing for everybody. Very comfortable. And we had our little blindfold things on. We put those on. The journey started. The music started, and it was a psychedelic journey. So there was some arduousness, and there was some emergence, and there was some revelations. And I really, really wanted to go outside. They didn't let me, which was sad for me. But maybe that was part of it too. And the whole trip, I could tell, maybe I'll save the trip for a Trip Tales session, because I did get my answer to my intention and more. And it's really, really, it was so simple that when it happened, my reaction was duh. And so then, that was what it was. You all know what that's like. And then we did an integration for the rest of the week. So we met with the guides, and we met with each other. We told each other our stories, and did a cacao ceremony. Did a Eucharist. Sang and sat and talked and walked. And the really interesting thing again was that the Truffles was a sort of peak experience. But the psychedelic journey started from the first dinner I had on the streets of Amsterdam with 3 of the other participants through to the very last goodbye. Like the whole thing was absolutely mind-blowingly psychedelic at turns. And it sort of began to feel like we were sharing trips. Like, just because I had the experience, if I told you about the experience, now it's in your head. And you told me about your experience, and now that's in my head. And they weirdly interact with each other. And your experience kind of becomes my experience, and our stories start to interweave. So doing it as a group that had bonded was really powerful. And I didn't know any of them beforehand. And now we are very, very dear in each other's lives. And it was a week, with a powerful week. But so that's beautiful and exciting to me. And so the trip kind of didn't end with the wearing off of the plant medicine. The world continued to speak throughout. And it changed, I think, everybody that was there. Everybody had a very profound and shifting experience. So that was that. And then we came back, and we're still continuing to do integration work. We touch base with each other and with Hunt, and we sort of plan what's next. That John Hopkins study that he was involved with to kick this whole thing off was supposed to be released in the spring. The lead researcher in that study has cancer, so it's been delayed. I think it's now gonna be around Christmas when it comes out. So that's something to look for. And it's changed everybody's ministry. Of course it has. So, meanwhile, in my own denomination, I'm connected with a growing handful of ministers who are interested in psychedelics and religion. And that's the extent of that conversation. We don't know what it looks like if we want it to exist in the institution, if we want it to exist adjacent to the institution and be trained as professionals to be guides. To my great surprise, I'm an institutionalist, and I do want and hope that entheogens can be brought into a institutional setting. One of the reasons why I think that's a good idea is because I have professional accountability. It doesn't mean that people like me don't fuck up. But when we do, we are held to account. And if we do and it results in harm done to somebody else, that person has a place to go to that they can hold to account, right? So there is a dark side to this movement. And I'm interested in mitigating that as much as possible. And there's lots of avenues to do that. One that I like is to bring it into the institutions, have professional accountability in the same way that I do now, but just specific to plant medicine and care around that. Have professional standards. I don't want to over-institutionalize it because that gets it, I don't want it to become too clinical or something like that. And there's certainly a place for, in a way, I imagine, psychedelics to be in a clinical setting. That's how they've kind of survived from the 60s to now. And, the therapeutic uses of them are increasingly more documented, and it almost feels like it's moving into the mainstream of psychological therapy. Is that what I'm trying to say? Of the therapeutic world. But it's still, because the religious world is like, just in the West has been co-opted centuries ago by the powers that be, and then married to like this weird purity culture that didn't do anybody any favors. And so we're like weirdly hesitant to enter this conversation, I feel, which blows my mind, because the roots of this path, I think, are spiritual roots. Like, how are we having this spiritual event that the spiritual professionals, are ignoring or prevented from participating in? It just doesn't make any sense to me at all. And in my own congregation, there has been a strong reaction, for and opposed, to even mentioning psychedelics. So that, which I'm naive, so that was a surprise to me. I thought, of course, people interested in religion are going to be interested in this stuff, but that's not the case always, evidently. So my vision for the future is that we do bring it into the institution, that we do it in a safe way, that we do it in a way that probably might, in my vision, and it's evolving and in conversation. So where I'm at right now is that I sort of see this as being useful for rites of passage into adulthood, into marriage, parenthood, or not marriage necessarily, but deep relationship anyway, parenthood, maybe retirement, elderhood. So I see a real opportunity to take those keystone moments in our lives and really pump them full of meaning and intentionality in the same way that I brought that intention to that group setting. And also maybe, like if you have a deep question that you need to ponder, if it doesn't have to just be rites of passage, but if you're just needing to have a deep connection in that moment, you can go to your congregational leadership, say, I'd like to do this. And I'd say, great, let's develop a practice. Let's develop an intention. Let's see if we have a group of people that want to do this with us, and then me and probably somebody else will be your guides and make that deep spiritual connection that I think people are hungry for. I'm hungry for it. So that's kind of my vision. That's in conversation now with several other colleagues, both within my tradition and outside my tradition. And I think in the next year or so, you're going to see some attempts to formalize recognition of the value of plant medicine from within some traditional religions in the West. And I hope to be part of that. I hope I don't get fired before I have a chance to be part of that. And because I do think that, I think it's a spiritual tool, and this world needs all the spiritual tools it can get. So that's all I've got to say for now. I'm happy to take questions if you have any. And if you don't, we could eat.
So many questions. I'm going to wait till the end until everybody else asks theirs.
Fair enough.
I do have one question. It's a little tangential, just from what you started with, talking about how you were annoyed that you didn't really find any other clergy that were interested in it. And I guess mine is like, what are your thoughts on how similar some of the visuals and things like that in like temples, like Sri Lankan temples or Middle Eastern temple or mosques and things like that, just how similar it can be to those psychedelic experiences?
Well, I imagine that any spiritual experience I don't see a distinction necessarily between spiritual experience and psychedelic experience.
Okay.
That you don't have to have the plant medicine to do that. You could do it with breath work. You could do it with intense prayer. The bards of the Celtic bards to go through the bardic school, they culminated their training with a night where they would spend it in a windowless room or a cave, so dark, right, completely pitch black. They would put a stone on their belly, so they would restrict their breathing for the night, and they would sit in the dark until their poem came to them. So basically, they're sort of manufacturing a sensory deprivation chamber.
Yeah, it's like an ordeal, but a sensory deprivation.
Exactly. And so then they would get their poem, they would get their vision. It was a vision quest, right? So these kind of traditions are all over the world. Some of them involve plants. Some of them involve other ways to alter your consciousness, right? And I'm reading The Web of Meaning, I think it's called, by Jeremy Lint right now, and he talks about not strange attractors, but attractors. Basically, that like a candle flame changes all the time, but has the same basic shape, right? So in a way, I can sort of see a spiritual experience being kind of having the same attractor principle, where they're very similar, but they're also changing or varied, right?
Yeah.
But they have the same shape.
That makes sense.
Yeah. I'll go here.
Can you define and describe spiritual?
Yeah. So to me, I'm so glad you asked that question. Because a guy at my congregation in Tucson asked me that same question, and we had a wonderful conversation. I said that spirituality, a spiritual experience, was one where your sense of your sense of your identity, your sense of self, expanded. So your relational identification with experienced an expansion. And he didn't give me an example, but he didn't give me a definition, but he gave me an example. He said for him, home, the sense of home, was a spiritual experience. And that started me off on thinking about, like, how do we get home? And I think those two things actually work well together. Like, when you go home, like your actual house home, you feel recognized by the material in your place. And you recognize the material in your place. And you identify. There's an identification with. So when that same kind of feeling can grow to the world or to these people, I think that's a spiritual experience. So, if that didn't answer your question, hopefully it answered part of your question or addressed it anyway.
Yeah. So it seems like psychedelics are starting to reemerge through more like secular therapy and the general conversation, and that they have a very clear roadmap, a very clear use case, like specific psychiatric conditions being treated with certain people, which are therapists under certain conditions, and they have in a sense of once they've accomplished the end, like they know the starting point and the end point of that path. But for a lot of people who maybe don't find themselves in that category, they still seem to have an improvement in the quality of their life, in a sense of meaning and purpose, and something you could call the spiritual. I'm curious, I really enjoyed hearing what you're saying about how having people who can be held to account would be the kind of people to be involved. I'm curious, like, do you have a sense of vision of what that endpoint is that people are aiming for, who maybe aren't doing it in like a therapeutic context? And like, what does that path look like, and how can psychedelics be part of that?
Yeah. I don't know that I don't think there is necessarily an endpoint. I don't know, that seems like, I don't know that enlightenment is a thing that you get to keep all the time. And I don't know why. It feels like if you get there once, you should be able to stay there. But that hasn't been my experience. And enlightenment could go by any name, various different names, right? So to me, I think it's more about, in a way, maintenance than arrival. Like, it's like you're not. I don't know. A number of metaphors come to mind, but none of them really feel great. But like, it's like staying physically fit. Like you have to work at it all the time, and you never get to a point where you're like, and I'm done. And I guess what I'm saying is that this spiritual thing needs to be maintained. Yeah. So it's more of a maintenance thing.
First of all, thanks for sharing your story. You mentioned professional accountability that you see that an institution could bring into the space. When organized religion doesn't have the track record of accountability, how do you see, maybe you could just speak about your church, how do you see that being an authority to bring such a powerful thing into an institution that, or any religious institution that has the record of overusing that power on people?
Yeah, I used to think that we were lucky as Unitarian Universalists because we lost the big fight that would have, we lost to the Catholics, basically. At the Council of Nicaea, we were the losing side of that big debate, and because of that, Rome didn't choose us, and therefore we got to escape without too much blood on our hands, because Rome captured Catholicism, and it has been a difficult history, I think. There's been a lot of really amazing elements of that tradition as well. But it turns out that Unitarian Universalism has its own garbage too, and that we have, and my spiritual ancestors have done their fair share to cause harm. And I guess all I could say is that I don't know, like if it wasn't, it's a double-edged sword. I don't. There's no easy way out of that answer. It's a really fair question, or out of that question, it's a really fair and important question to ask. And I guess someone said to me recently that not all wounds should heal. Some wounds should remain at least partially wounded so that we don't do it again. And so I think, I don't know, I can't speak for other traditions, but in my tradition, we are having a reckoning, particularly around sexual misconduct in the clergy. Not the same kind of sexual misconduct as happened in Catholicism, but it's there and it's gross, and it causes damage to people and institutions. Like churches that have had sexual misconduct in them have particular cultures that have developed around that wound, and so we get training. If we go into a church that has that history, you get some special training to make you aware of how the system might behave now. And we're able to do that because we are an institution, right? And so, like, I don't know. You just have to be careful. But you have to be careful whether it's in an institution or not. I mean, there's, even in like the sort of shamanic world of psychedelic practices, there is a lot of yuck in that too, right? I don't mean to overemphasize the yuck, but the yuck is there. The problem there is that there isn't any, it's all underground. So there is no accountability in the same way that there would be if it was above ground and in an institution, right? Like, you would have somebody to sue. You could sue my entire denomination or my church, my congregation. I would get kicked out of my profession for, if I transgressed in certain ways. So it's not a perfect system, and it certainly has created harm in the past. And so we would hopefully do better. But we would have rules, right? I mean, we would have guidelines and expectations. Doesn't mean we're always follow them.
Mark, you next, or?
That's okay. Cool.
Okay.
I think this is a pretty quick comment. Institutions, like individuals, we all do things that are corrupt at times. So I think that's important to recognize that, not to forgive, not to overlook, but there also has to be ways back to center, back to whole, while recognizing that we all have the capacity to harm. And we do. We harm people without being aware of it. Most of the harm we do is without, because our intentions are good, mostly, right? 99% of the time, my intentions are good, but the person experiencing it might feel a negative impact. So if we're always judging ourselves based on the impact, that also leads to a lot of ugliness. So that's my comment. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, so what you were saying about a reckoning towards how there can be sexual misconduct in religious institutions is actually very similar to what's being talked about right now openly in psychedelic therapy. And so it's very interesting you mention that. And I'm curious, knowing that none of us know the answers, have all the perspective to know the perfect solution, but basis. Maybe it's consensual, maybe it's not consensual, but there is meant to be a boundary, but one where it's something that we're not re-traumatizing people. So yeah, really, really complicated question, but I'd love to know your thoughts on sort of how you create those boundaries, I suppose.
Well, I mean, I already have boundaries professionally. And so there's like some real simple things you can do, right? Like two people, always two people in a room, especially, like for in my tradition and congregation, like there is no time when it's one adult and one younger than adult in the room at a time. It's always at least two adults in the room. And so that same sort of like those very basic kind of structural things can apply. The thing that you were talking about energetically, I think that is really, that's a new question. At least like that is a question that I think is very appropriate and somewhat specific to psychedelics. I mean, in the spiritual realm, maybe in general, but like definitely psychedelics, right? The energetic, your energetic receptivity and output is live. And that just kind of leads me to say, like, man, these are really powerful medicines. And even like just holotropic breath work is a powerful moment. And so I don't have the answers to that, but I think that the conversation, it's better to have the conversation and to I think publicly and is better than underground. So yeah.
Thank you.
Hi. I was interested to hear that you said that is it Unitarian Universalism?
Unitarian Universalism
is moving into a more mystical direction.
That's my reason.
Yeah. So that's very interesting. That's cool. So what sources are they drawing on to help people transition or integrate like ego dissolution experiences or anything like that from the UU perspective? Or are there some?
Yeah, the ones that I use, that I rely on, I like, right now I'm very turned on by complexity theory. And mixed with, which actually isn't really, in some ways it's the same thing with like indigenous perspectives. But that's kind of like that's where I'm vibing. And I'm not so much about the ego dissolution necessarily as not ego expansion, but identity expansion. So maybe those are different ways of looking at the same thing. But for me, I'm really interested in relationship. And yeah. So, I mean, there's lots of book resources. That's the thing, right? Like I love to read. And actually I do have a spiritual experience, both reading and writing. That does happen. But it's different from like the psychedelic experience that one gets from a direct experience with transcendence. And so after that, but I do think, I guess the answer to your question is kind of no. And that's what I want to try to develop, right? Because I think that resource would be integration post-experience, right? And preparation pre-experience. And whatever is your map. We use are really good at using a lot of different maps. So whatever your map is, let's operate with that vocabulary and that lens. And we'll walk you into the experience. You have the experience. We'll walk you out of the experience. But that's not really how we operate right now. And we are like, there is the culture wars and all of this paradigm shifting stuff that's taking place in the broader culture is absolutely taking place in my own tradition and many of the other traditions too. for us, it looks a little different because we are emerging from a hardcore humanist perspective, right? A very atheistic, humanist, materialist perspective. And so my conservatives are humanists. And I'm sort of a progressive in my tradition. And of course, clergy are often, we are the leaders of our tradition, so we are often at the progressive edge, or I suppose in other traditions, maybe the conservative edge, but we tend to be at the edge. And so, we're trying to bring our people along a little bit to this new vista that I think we've seen that does have to do with some of the larger stuff that's going on in the world right now that I think we're trying, my read is that we're trying to shift paradigms. Big old honking word, right? We're trying to shift our worldview, and that doesn't happen without some arguments. That's not the question you asked, but that's where I would.
It makes sense. It's honest. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Kenny, and then Bart. You were raising your hand.
So I think this kind of stems off the last couple. So, clearly, Unitarians and you kind of branch of those are going to be at the tip of many spears in terms of the things you're open to, compared to the other sects or whatever you want to call them. So after your experience at the conference, where there was some intermingling, and as well as this kind of network you formed, like where do the others stand? Obviously, there's millions of people out there. I'm sure you haven't talked to everyone, but just being in the game, I'm assuming you're generally at the leading edge, but where are the others around it, based on your experience?
Yeah, so we have a cohort of UU clergy that are having this conversation. There is a cohort in the United States. The UCC Church is obviously not the United Church of Canada. It's the United Church of Christ, which is just a very liberal Christian tradition. I believe I have heard that at their next year's big conference that they're going to try to say, we acknowledge, recognize, condone, I don't know what the verb is going to be, but this practice. So they're going to have that conversation. We'll see if it passes. I'm trying to generate some momentum to not reinvent their wheel, but use their language, and so that we could all point to each other and say they're doing it, and they can say they're doing it. And Hunt is an Episcopalian. Now I don't know how widespread this thing is, but I do know it's very much in the culture. You got Netflix every couple of months. There's a documentary of some kind or another about it. So, and there's a visitor here. What? Oh. It's a potluck. Didn't bring anything. So I don't know. I imagine that it's this John Hopkins study when it comes out, and that was one of the there was a strategy. Hunt had a sort of strategy, as did his organization, which includes the people who are giving that organization money, and enough money that they paid for all of our plane tickets to go to the Netherlands, right? So. Yeah. So the idea is that the Hopkins things drops and there's a cohort of clergy who have had this experience and who can speak to it. So there is a bit of a media strategy there, I think. But I don't know the intricacies of it. I don't know how widespread it is, but I think publicly, culturally, it's quite widespread at the moment.
Well, we will expect you to report back.
Okay.
My question was kind of around the same thing. When we heard your vision, right? But when you got the brochure, right? What was the overarching kind of purpose, or what was trying to be achieved by bringing your group together? What were they hoping to? Whatever you want to call it, objective, mission statement. purpose?
So you can go to ligare.org, and they have a mission statement and things of that nature. Specific to the retreat,
Yeah.
it's a slightly different question. I don't know if I could answer that very well. I do know that there were a few people there who had never done psychedelics before. The age ranged from early 20s to, I think, 80. And the 80-year-old had never done psychedelics. And then there were a number of, there were some experienced Christian leaders who were there as well, which happily blew my mind. And I think the idea was just to begin to cohere and coalesce a group of people who have had this experience, who could advocate or warn or speak wisely about entheogens.
I have another question. When you mentioned that giving psychedelic ceremony access to people as rite of passage or retirement or etc., I strongly support that. How do you see that being integrated with modern medicine and psychotherapy? Because psychedelics can also be used for healing traumas.
Yeah.
And not only it bonds people together, but it makes you reflect back to yourself and looking at your past traumas and go back and heal yourself. And in some cases, that's also great for solo journey as well as the group journeys. How do you see religion giving access, the community access to people, and also integrating that to modern medicine and psychotherapy in the future? And how can we vote for that to happen?
How can you vote for that to happen? Join my church. So I'm not a therapist, right? And that's a really, really important thing to note. Like even in pastoral care, you're having problems in your life, you come to me, we talk. Like I got like a three strikes and you're out policy. Like we meet 3 times, and if we haven't solved an issue, then I'm not the person to help. I call or refer you to a therapist who is trained in that more long-term care, right? So my profession speaks more to the spiritual side of things, which that gets a little blurry sometimes. But again, the conversation here is so brand new that I could absolutely see the religious professional and the psychiatric professional working together. That some things could fall in this person's jurisdiction, and some things can fall in this person's jurisdiction. And then they would maybe talk together. Like it could be a team of professionals trained in different ways. You could have an art therapist, right? Like you could have, there could be a number of different ways to arrange it. But, so I don't know how, but I appreciate the question, because I think there's wisdom in considering it, yeah.
This collaboration of institutional, professionals, do you see a space for unorganized or uninstitutional, authorities in psychedelics, like the shamanic experience
Yes.
or leaders?
Yeah, I would say yes, but I don't know what that looks like. I mean, there's lineages of folks who have been doing this for a long time that know way more about this than I do. And it would be idiotic to reject that wisdom and that all those years of experience. So that would be foolish. So yeah, I think there would need to be I don't know if a coordination is the right word, but certainly a collegiality, and I don't know, working together. But yeah, there is a space for that. And maybe as it gets more mainstream in mainstream religion, and it allows those lineages a place to surface above the underground and have their own sets of, accountable practices and whatnot. That's the main thing, like, that in terms of, like the institutional thing, like you've said, it is a double-edged sword, but it does at least provide a container that has some accountability to other folks in the container, right? And so I just want it to be as safe as possible for people. Perfect.
Right.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
All right.
No,
we're about at the hour mark. I think we're gonna break. Are you hanging around?
Yeah, I need to eat.
Sweet. so be able to have more questions or whatever, and be in the small groups and stuff, and plenty of time. So, yeah. Thank you. So I think we'll do the kind of the normal thing. Gonna call 1, 2, 3, 4 for the small groups, and then since it's getting late, if you want to take food into your small groups, I think that's cool, and then we'll kind of break up or whatever. And yeah, thanks for coming, and we'll see you around hanging for a bit.